Khalid ibn al-Walid received the message at Firaz. One of his fellow commanders was trapped, not defeated. Trapped. There is a difference. Iyad ibn Ghanam had been besieging the fortress of Dumat al-Jandal for weeks. He had the men. He had the resolve. What he did not have was the one thing that breaks fortresses: time. The defenders knew relief was coming from the north. Byzantine-aligned Christian Arab tribes were marching south. If they reached Dumat before Khalid did, Iyad's entire force would be crushed between stone walls and an enemy army. The conventional response would have been to tell Iyad to withdraw, preserve his men, abandon the siege. Khalid did the opposite. He marched his entire army 600 miles through hostile desert to save a siege most commanders would have written off as unwinnable. What happened at Dumat al-Jandal was not a rescue. It was a demonstration of something far more dangerous. That Khalid had turned the Arabian Peninsula into a chessboard where he could move faster than his enemies could think. Before we proceed with the Battle of Dumat al-Jandal, drop a comment below and tell me where you are watching from and what time it is in your area. And don't forget to smash that subscribe button, because this story is about to go deep. June 633 CE. The Ridda Wars are entering their final phase. The term Ridda Wars is itself a distortion, a religious label imposed on what was fundamentally a political crisis. When Muhammad died in June 632, the nascent Islamic State faced an existential question that had nothing to do with theology and everything to do with power. Would the tribes of Arabia remain unified under Medinan authority, or would they revert to their pre-Islamic independence? Some tribes rejected the authority of the caliphate outright. Others accepted Islam, but refused to pay the zakat tax to Medina, arguing they had pledged loyalty to Muhammad personally, not to his successors. Others still saw the Prophet's death as an opportunity to install their own prophets and create rival power centers. What the histories call apostasy was, in most cases, a rational political calculation by tribal leaders who had been forced into submission and now saw a chance to reclaim autonomy. Abu Bakr, the first caliph, faced a choice: accept the fracturing of Arabia into independent tribal territories, or enforce Medinan supremacy through military conquest. He chose conquest, and to execute that conquest, he unleashed Khalid ibn al-Walid. By June 633, Khalid had already broken the back of organized resistance in central and eastern Arabia. The battles of Buzaka, Gamra, Nakra, Zafar, and the catastrophic engagement at Ulays had shattered every major rebel coalition. Musaylima, the false prophet, was dead. Sajah, the prophetess, had fled. The Persian-aligned tribes of the eastern frontier had been driven back across the Euphrates after Khalid drowned an entire Persian army in a river of blood. What remained of the Ridda resistance was scattered, demoralized, and confined to the periphery. But periphery does not mean irrelevant. The northern frontier of Arabia, the region bordering Byzantine Syria, remained contested. And at the center of that frontier sat Dumat al-Jandal. Dumat al-Jandal was not a city, it was a fortress, a stone stronghold built around a natural spring in the northern Arabian desert, positioned at the intersection of caravan routes linking Syria, Iraq, and the Hijaz. Whoever controlled Dumat controlled the flow of trade and the movement of armies between the Byzantine Empire and the Arabian interior. For centuries, Dumat had been held by the Kalb tribe, Christian Arabs aligned with Byzantium and hostile to Medina. The fortress itself was ancient, its walls pre-Islamic, its defenses tested by generations of raiders and besiegers. It had never fallen by assault. Every army that had tried to storm Dumat had either starved outside its walls or been forced to withdraw when relief arrived. The man holding Dumat in June 633 was Uqaydir ibn Abd al-Malik, a Christian Arab chieftain who had briefly submitted to Muhammad years earlier, paid tribute, and then promptly reasserted his independence the moment the Prophet died. Uqaydir understood leverage. He knew that Medina needed Dumat pacified before it could project power into Syria. He knew the Byzantines needed Dumat held to prevent Arab raids into their southern provinces. And he knew that as long as he could hold the fortress and maintain contact with Byzantine-aligned tribes to the north, he was untouchable. Abu Bakr knew this too, which is why, even before Khalid had finished his eastern campaigns, the Caliph dispatched a separate army to deal with Dumat. The commander he chose was Iyad ibn Ghanam, a competent officer who had proven himself in earlier engagements, but lacked Khalid's reputation and Khalid's tactical brilliance. Iyad's orders were straightforward: march to Dumat, besiege the fortress, and force Uqaydir to surrender or starve. Iyad reached Dumat sometime in early June 633. He surrounded the fortress, cut off the caravan routes, and settled in for what he assumed would be a grinding but achievable siege. Uqaydir had supplies. Iyad had time, or so he thought. What Iyad did not know, what no one in the Arab camp knew until it was almost too late, was that Uqaydir had sent riders north the moment the siege began. Those riders reached the Ghassan and Salih tribes, both Christian, both Byzantine-aligned, both willing to march south and relieve Dumat if it meant preventing Medina from consolidating control over the northern frontier. Within days of Iyad's arrival, a relief force was forming 300 miles to the north, and it was moving fast. Iyad learned of this through his scouts sometime in mid-June. The details were sparse, but the implications were catastrophic. A Byzantine-aligned coalition army, potentially several thousand strong, was marching toward Dumat. If they arrived before the fortress fell, Iyad's force would be caught between the fortress garrison and the relief army. His men would be slaughtered, the siege would collapse, and Medina's entire northern strategy would unravel. Iyad had three options. He could storm the fortress immediately, accepting massive casualties in the hope of breaking through before the relief army arrived. He could withdraw, abandon the siege, and retreat south before he was trapped. Or he could send a message to Khalid and hope that the man who had never lost a battle could somehow cross 600 miles of desert in time to save him. He chose the third option. The message Iyad sent to Khalid was blunt: "We are besieging Dumat. Relief is coming from the north. We cannot hold. Come, or we lose everything." Khalid received this message at Firaz, deep in the Iraqi frontier, where he had just finished annihilating a combined Persian-Christian-Arab force. His army was exhausted. His supply lines were stretched. The logical response would have been to advise Iyad to withdraw and preserve his force for another engagement. That is what any reasonable commander would have done. Khalid did the opposite. He ordered an immediate march west. Here is where we need to stop and correct something that almost every popular account of this campaign gets wrong. The march to Dumat al-Jandal is remembered, when it is remembered at all, as an act of daring cavalry heroism. Khalid rode to the rescue. He saved the day. The end. That narrative is not just incomplete. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of what Khalid actually did. Khalid did not ride to Dumat. He marched an entire army 600 miles through hostile desert in less than 2 weeks. That is not heroism. That is logistics. To understand the scale of what Khalid pulled off, you need to understand the terrain. The distance from Firaz to Dumat al-Jandal is roughly 600 miles as the crow flies. The actual marching distance, accounting for terrain and available water sources, was closer to 700 miles. The route crossed some of the most hostile desert in Arabia, waterless stretches where even Bedouin guides refused to travel in summer. There were no established supply depots, no caravan routes Khalid could follow safely without risking ambush by hostile tribes, no margin for error. A conventional army, moving at standard marching pace, covers roughly 15 miles per day under good conditions. At that rate, Khalid's march would have taken nearly 7 weeks. He had 2. This is where the misconception about cavalry dash collapses. Khalid did not take a small mobile force. He took his entire army, infantry, cavalry, supply train, camp followers, everything. Because if he arrived at Dumat with just cavalry and the relief army was already there, he would be outnumbered and outpositioned. He needed mass, he needed combined arms, and he needed to arrive with enough force to not just relieve Iyad, but to decisively crush whatever was waiting for him when he got there. So how did he move 700 miles in 2 weeks with a full army? The answer is not in the histories. The histories give you dates and outcomes. They do not give you methodology. But if you reconstruct the march using terrain maps, water sources, and medieval military logistics, the picture that emerges is staggering. Khalid stripped his army down to combat essentials. Every man carried his own water in goatskin bags. Every man carried his own rations, dried dates, barley flour, enough for 2 weeks with nothing to spare. The supply train was reduced to absolute minimum. Fodder for the horses, replacement weapons, medical supplies. Everything else was abandoned at Firaz. No tents, no cooking equipment, no luxuries. The army would sleep on the ground, eat cold rations, and drink from whatever water sources the Bedouin guides could find. The guides were critical. Khalid hired Bedouin trackers from tribes that knew the interior desert routes, the paths that avoided both Byzantine patrols and hostile Arab settlements. These were not caravan routes, they were survival routes, used by smugglers and raiders who needed to cross the desert without being seen. The guides led the army along a series of marginal water sources, wells that were too bitter for settled populations, but drinkable for men desperate enough. Some of these wells were nothing more than seeps in dry riverbeds. The army would stop, dig, wait for the water to pool, fill every container, and move on before sunrise. The march discipline was brutal. Khalid enforced a punishing schedule. March from 2 hours before dawn until 2 hours after sunrise. Rest during the brutal midday heat. March again from late afternoon until 2 hours after sunset. That gave the army roughly 10 to 12 hours of movement per day, covering 30 to 35 miles, if the terrain allowed it. Any man who fell behind was left with a water skin and prayers. The army could not slow down. If they slowed down, Iyad died. If Iyad died, Dumat remained in enemy hands. If Dumat remained in enemy hands, the northern frontier stayed hostile, and the entire strategic position Khalid had spent a year building would collapse. Khalid's officers protested. His men grumbled. The Bedouin guides told him he was insane. He ignored all of them, because Khalid understood something about operational tempo that most of his contemporaries did not. Speed is not just a tactical advantage. It is a weapon. If you move faster than your enemy's decision cycle, you do not just surprise them. You break them. They cannot adapt because they are always responding to your last move, never anticipating your next one. The Byzantine-aligned relief force marching south toward Dumat had no idea Khalid was coming. Why would they? The last confirmed reports placed Khalid's army 600 miles to the east, in Iraq. No army could cross that distance in time to matter. The relief commanders assumed they had weeks. They marched at a comfortable pace, gathering additional tribal contingents as they moved south, taking their time because time was on their side. Khalid reached the outskirts of Dumat al-Jandal 13 days after leaving Firaz. His army was exhausted, dehydrated, and running on fumes. But they were there, and the relief force was still 3 days out. Iyad ibn Ghanem did not believe the scouts when they reported Khalid's arrival. It was impossible. He had sent the message less than 3 weeks ago. Khalid was supposed to be in Iraq. The scouts insisted. Iyad walked to the northern edge of his siege lines and saw the dust cloud. Then he saw the banners. Then he saw Khalid himself riding ahead of the main column, and Iyad later admitted that he wept. Khalid did not stop to celebrate. He rode directly into Iyad's camp, called an immediate council of officers, and demanded a full tactical briefing. How many men did Iyad have? What was the condition of the fortress? How many defenders were inside? What was the status of the relief force? How long until they arrived? Iyad's answers were grim. He had roughly 4,000 men, though the siege had worn them down. The fortress was still fully provisioned. Uqaydir had at least 1,000 fighters inside, maybe more. The relief force was estimated at 5,000 to 6,000 men, mostly cavalry, and they would arrive within 3 to 4 days. Khalid did the math. He had brought 3,500 men from Firaz. Combined with Iyad's force, that gave him 7,500 total. If the relief force arrived and linked up with the fortress garrison, Khalid would be facing 7,000 enemies. With his back to a fortified position, he could not storm quickly. That was not acceptable. So Khalid made the decision that defined the entire engagement. He would not wait for the relief force to arrive. He would go meet them. But before he could do that, he had to solve the fortress problem. Dumat al-Jandal was not going to fall by assault. The walls were too strong, the defenders too well supplied. Khalid could not afford to leave a garrison behind to continue the siege while he marched north. That would split his force and leave both halves vulnerable. He needed Uqaydir neutralized without a fight. This is where Khalid's understanding of leverage comes into play. Uqaydir was holding the fortress because he believed relief was coming. He was waiting for the Byzantine-aligned tribes to arrive and lift the siege. His strategy was fundamentally defensive. Hold out, conserve supplies, wait for rescue. That strategy made perfect sense as long as rescue was actually coming. Khalid sent a messenger into the fortress under a flag of truce. The message was simple. The relief force you are waiting for will not arrive. I am marching north to intercept them. When I destroy them, you will be alone. Surrender now, and I will offer terms. Refuse, and when I return, there will be no terms. Uqaydir did not believe him. No commander marches away from a siege to chase a relief force, unless he is desperate. It made no sense. Khalid was bluffing. Uqaydir sent the messenger back with a refusal. Khalid expected this. He did not need Uqaydir to surrender. He needed Uqaydir to doubt, because doubt would keep him inside the fortress, watching and waiting, rather than sallying out to attack Iyad's weakened lines the moment Khalid marched north. On the second day after his arrival, Khalid left Iyad with 2,000 men to maintain the siege and marched north with the rest of his force. 5,500 men, mostly cavalry, moving fast and light. The strategy was textbook. Khalid: identify the enemy's operational center of gravity, move faster than they can react, and destroy them before they understand what is happening. The Byzantine-aligned relief force was 3 days out from Dumat when their scouts reported an Arab army marching north to meet them. The commanders held council. The reports were confusing. The Arab force was too large to be a scouting party, but too small to be Iyad's entire siege army. Where had they come from? Who was leading them? By the time the relief commanders figured out that the army marching toward them was Khalid ibn al-Walid, it was too late to retreat. Khaled had positioned his force across the caravan route, blocking the path to Dumat. The relief army could either fight or withdraw north and abandon Uqaydir to his fate. They chose to fight. The engagement that followed was not a battle. It was a controlled demolition. Khalid deployed his cavalry in a crescent formation, anchored on a low ridge that gave him elevation and visibility. The Byzantine-aligned force was larger, but they were marching in column, not deployed for combat. Khalid waited until they began to spread out, forming a line, and then he attacked before the formation was set. The right wing of Khalid's cavalry hit the enemy left flank at full charge, shattering their front line before they could brace. The center held position, pinning the enemy in place with archery and skirmishing. The left wing swung wide, threatening encirclement. It was the same tactical pattern Khalid had used at Ulays, at Firaz, at a dozen other engagements. Hit hard on one flank, pin the center, envelop with the other flank. The enemy line did not collapse immediately. These were experienced tribal fighters, not conscripts, but it bent, and then it cracked, and then it broke. The Byzantine-aligned commanders tried to rally their men. A few units held firm and fought back-to-back in defensive squares. Most ran. The pursuit was methodical and brutal. Khalid's cavalry ran down fleeing units for miles, killing or capturing anyone who could not reach the safety of the northern settlements. By the time the sun set, the relief force had ceased to exist as a coherent army. Khalid returned to Dumat al-Jandal 3 days later with prisoners, captured banners, and the heads of the enemy commanders. He had Iyad display them outside the fortress walls, where Uqaydir could see them from the ramparts. Then Khalid sent another messenger. The message was the same as before, but the context had changed. The relief force is destroyed. No one is coming. Surrender now, or we will starve you out and crucify you when the walls fall. The surrender negotiations took less than a day. Uqaydir agreed to open the gates, submit to Medina's authority, and pay the jizya tax in exchange for his life and a guarantee that his people would not be enslaved. Khalid accepted. The fortress gates opened. Khalid's men marched in. Dumat al-Jandal, the fortress that had resisted sieges for generations, fell without a single assault. The Arab sources praised this as a great victory, and by any conventional military standard, it was. Khalid had marched 600 miles, relieved a besieged commander, destroyed a relief army, and secured the surrender of a critical fortress, all in less than a month. The northern frontier was now open. The path to Syria was clear. Khalid had proven, yet again, that he could do things no one else could. But here is where the story turns dark. After the surrender, Khalid held a feast. The sources describe it as a celebration of victory, a moment of rest after weeks of relentless campaigning. The feast was held inside the fortress, in the hall that had belonged to Uqaydir. Khalid's officers drank, ate, and distributed the captured supplies among the men. The mood was jubilant. They had won. Again. What the sources do not dwell on, what they mention only in passing, is what happened to the prisoners. The men captured from the relief army were given a choice: convert to Islam and join Medina's army, or be executed. Most converted. The ones who refused were killed. This was standard practice for the time, not unique to Khalid or even to the early Islamic conquests. Medieval warfare did not have Geneva Conventions. Prisoners were liabilities unless they could be ransomed, enslaved, or integrated. Refusing conversion was treated as an act of continued hostility, and hostility was met with death. Modern readers recoil at this. Medieval commanders did not. This was the logic of conquest, applied consistently by Romans, Persians, Christians, and Muslims alike. If you want to understand Khalid's campaigns, you cannot sanitize them. The victories were real. So was the violence. The feast at Dumat was not a celebration of justice. It was a celebration of power. Khaled had demonstrated to every fortress, every tribe, every regional power in northern Arabia that resistance was futile. He could march faster than you could call for help. He could destroy your allies before they reached you. And when your walls finally opened, the terms would be his, not yours. Uqaydir understood this. He had gambled on Byzantine support and lost. Now he would live as a subordinate to Medina, his fortress garrisoned by men loyal to the Caliph, his autonomy gone, his leverage erased. He had survived, but he had lost everything that made survival worth having. The broader consequences of Dumat's fall rippled across the northern frontier for months. Other fortresses and tribal coalitions that had been waiting to see if Byzantium would intervene saw what happened to Uqaydir and drew the obvious conclusion. Medina was not a distant threat. It was an immediate, overwhelming, and inescapable force. If you resisted, Khalid would come. And when Khalid came, you would lose. This was the strategic objective Abu Bakr had been pursuing since the beginning of the Ridda Wars. It was never just about defeating rebel armies. It was about breaking the will to resist. Khalid's march to Dumat did more to consolidate Medina's authority than a dozen conventional victories would have. Because the lesson was not, we can win battles. The lesson was, we can reach you before you can save yourself. But there is a darker implication buried in this victory, one that no one at the feast wanted to acknowledge. Khalid's success at Dumat was built on a lie, not a strategic deception, a logistical impossibility that only worked once. The march from Firaz to Dumat was not sustainable. Khalid stripped his army to the bone, pushed his men to the edge of collapse, and gambled that he could reach Ayad before the relief force arrived. He won that gamble. But if the relief force had been 2 days faster, or if Khalid's march had been delayed by a sandstorm, or if the Bedouin guides had led him to a dry well instead of a marginal seep, the entire operation would have collapsed. Khalid's army would have arrived too late, or not at all. Ayad would have been crushed. Dumat would have remained in enemy hands, and the northern frontier would have stayed hostile. Khalid did not repeat this kind of forced march again, not because he lacked the will, but because he understood the limits. You can break an army once with a march like that. Try it twice, and the army breaks you. Dumat was the logistical apex of Khalid's career, the furthest he could push human endurance and still deliver combat-effective troops at the other end. The reason this matters is that Khalid's legend is built on victories like Dumat, the undefeated commander, the man who always arrived in time, the general who could do the impossible. And all of that is true, but what the legend obscures is how close to failure he operated. Khalid's margin of error was razor thin. He won because he calculated risk better than anyone else, not because he was invulnerable. The feast ended. The officers dispersed. Khalid's army rested for 3 days, then marched south toward Medina. Abu Bakr received the news of Dumat's fall with quiet satisfaction. The northern frontier was secure. The Ridda Wars were effectively over. All that remained was the final phase, the invasion of Byzantine Syria and Sassanid Iraq, the campaigns that would transform the Islamic State from a regional power into a world historical empire. Khaled would lead those campaigns too, and he would win them. But Dumat was different. Dumat was the moment when Khalid stopped being just a brilliant tactician and became something more dangerous, a man who could reshape the strategic map through sheer operational audacity. The march to Dumat was not about winning a battle. It was about proving that distance was no longer a shield, that fortresses could be isolated, that relief forces could be intercepted, that the entire logic of defensive warfare in Arabia had been overturned by one man's willingness to do what everyone else thought was impossible. Uqaydir lived for several more years as a vassal of Medina. He watched the Arab armies march north into Syria. He watched the Byzantine Empire lose province after province. He watched the world he had known, the world where Christian Arab tribes played Byzantium and Persia against each other, where local chieftains could carve out autonomy in the desert margins, where a strong fortress was enough to keep you safe, collapse in less than a decade. He died sometime around 640, his fortress still standing, his people still alive, but his power long gone. History remembers him as a footnote, the man who surrendered Dumat to Khalid ibn al-Walid. What history does not record is what Uqaydir thought when he stood on the walls and watched Khalid's army arrive. Whether he felt relief that the siege would finally end, or terror at what was coming next. Whether he regretted the gamble he had made, or simply accepted that he had been outmaneuvered by a better player. Whether he understood, in that moment, that the age of men like him, regional strongmen who could hold a fortress and claim independence, was over. Khalid did not care. He had already moved on to the next campaign. The final line of the Dumat story is not about Khalid. It is about what he left behind. The fortress still stands, or what remains of it. You can visit the ruins today in northern Saudi Arabia, near the border with Jordan. The walls are crumbling. The spring still flows. Tourists take photos. Archaeologists catalog pottery shards. None of them know the name Uqaydir. Most of them do not even know there was a siege. But the fortress remembers. Every stronghold remembers. And the lesson Khalid taught at Dumat al-Jandal in June 1633 is the same lesson every besieged commander learns eventually. Walls do not save you if no one is coming to help.